Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sally and this is my channel Secret Life of a Seamstress, where I love to talk all about sewing and making clothes. I hope you're all doing really well today and thank you for joining me. So this video is the third in my mini series all about how to get started sewing. And today I'm going to be talking through a few tips on how to choose the right size when you're coming to sew a garment from a sewing pattern. Being able to sew for yourself is such an amazing hobby in my opinion. Not only do you get to create a wardrobe full of clothes that you've made yourself, that are also probably a lot better fitting than they would be if you'd bought them from the high street, but being able to sew is also really handy if you ever need to make any alterations to garments that you already own or to anything that you might want to own too. When I started sewing for myself, which was a good few years ago now, I found sizing so difficult. I assumed in the first case that I could take my ready-to-wear size, for example, that being say an 8 or a 10, and I could automatically transfer that size and sew that size from a sewing pattern as well. But unfortunately, most of the time it's not quite as easy as that, and that is because often sewing patterns will be sized differently. So depending on the type of garment that you're planning to sew, you're going to need different measurements for different parts of the body. So if you're planning to make a blouse, for example, you're going to need to take different measurements from, for example, if you were going to be sewing a pair of trousers. Here are some measurements that it can be good to take and note down and refer to when you're coming to choose your size when you're sewing from a sewing pattern. The high bust, which is around the crook of the armpits, is about 2 inches above your full bust. You'll then need to take the full bust measurement, which is the fullest part of your bust. You also need to know your natural waist measurement, which is the area around the narrowest part of your waist. Your hip measurement, which is the widest part of your hips, around your bottom area. It's also good to know your height in centimetres and inches. Your back to waist measurement, which is the bone from the base of your neck to your natural waistline. It's also handy to have the inside and outside leg measurement. So once you have all these measurements to hand, you'll then need to compare your own body measurements to those given on the body measurements on your pattern envelope. It sounds simple enough, but there are a few things to consider along the way as well. For example, if you're going to be sewing a pair of trousers, you'll only need to consider your waist and your hip measurement, and possibly your inside and outside leg as well. But for a pair of trousers, you won't need to reference your bust measurement because obviously your trousers aren't going to be covering your bust, they're only going to be covering the lower part of your body. If you are between sizes, so you might find that your hip measurement matches perfectly to the hip measurement on a size on the pattern envelope, but your waist measurement is slightly bigger than the waist measurement that's given. You may need to consider grading between sizes, but don't worry about that for now. If you're making, for example, a blouse, the main measurement that you need to consider here will be the most fitted part of the garment. So wherever the garment is most fitted on your body, so in the case of a blouse, that's most likely to be over your bust area. Blouses are generally fitted over the chest area and then they tend to sort of float out to your hips. Dresses can be a bit of a tricky one when you're coming to size for a dress. So if you're making something that's nice and floaty and oversized, for example, a baby doll dress, there's going to be a lot of ease there. So you won't necessarily need to worry too much again about the waist and hip measurement. But if you're making, for example, a bodycon dress or a shift dress, that type of dress tends to hug and skim over lots of areas of your body, so it will be fitted over the bust. It will generally be fitted around the waist as well and probably around your hips too. So in the case of that kind of more fitted dress, you'll need to consider your bust, waist and hip measurements. So that one's a little bit more tricky. So another thing to consider when you are selecting your size from a pattern envelope is the amount of ease given for the finished garment. So this can sound a little bit confusing, but it's actually more helpful in a roundabout way, and let me explain why. Ease is the amount of extra fabric or the extra sort of amount of inches given which will allow your garment to move with your body while you're wearing it. So can you imagine if we sewed a garment exactly to our own body measurements? It would be pretty uncomfortable to wear, wouldn't it? Because there would be no room for movement there. So when you're going about your day, or you're eating, or you're moving, or you're working, your garment would be so tightly fitted to your body that you would not be able to move. It would be very uncomfortable. So when you're sewing a garment, there is a certain amount of ease given to allow that kind of movement and allow for everyday wear. Most pattern companies now will include the finished garment measurements in their pattern envelopes. In my opinion, the finished garment measurements can actually be key to choosing your size, or the size that you want to sew. The amount of ease given in a garment, again, will directly relate to the style of the garment that you're planning to sew. So going back to my baby doll dress example, if you think about the style and the silhouette of a baby doll dress, it's very oversized normally, isn't it? So generally with a baby doll style dress, there will be a lot of ease allowed in the pattern. Going back to my bodycon dress example, there will not be so much ease allowed in that pattern because the style and the silhouette of that kind of dress is that it's quite close fitting to the body. So let me give you a real life example from a pattern that I have in my stash. This is the Tilly and the Buttons Marnie blouse and dress. So we can see here that in the sizing table, the body measurements are given here in the blue column, and then the finished garment measurements are given here on the pink column. So if my body measurements put me at a size 2, which I generally am in Tilly and the Buttons patterns, that places me at a size 32-inch bust, which is 81 centimeters. So that measurement is my body measurement. That's what I've measured my bust measurement to be. But we can see in the finished garment measurements that the bust measurement for the same size is actually 47.5 inches or 121 centimeters. So that is over 15 inches of ease around my bust. So if I make that pattern up as a size 2, I'm going to have 15 inches of ease around my bust. So obviously in this example, the pattern that I've chosen here is a smock style top and dress. So the general style and silhouette of this top is that it's very oversized. It's a floaty peasant style blouse. In my opinion, the main measurement that you want to take into account when sewing something that's quite oversized like this is probably, again, where it is going to be most fitted on the body, which is the high bust, but also the finished garment measurements. So when I made my Marnie blouse, I mainly took into consideration the finished garment measurements just to see how much ease there was going to be there, to see whether I wanted to actually size down so that I had less ease around the body because it would still fit me. There's a whopping 15 inches there. But you need to just think about how that garment is going to fit on you when it's done based on the finished measurements and based on how you are going to feel in it when it's made. So let's take the example then of a more fitted dress. So this is a new look shift dress pattern. So you can see from the image on the pattern that this dress is much more fitted. It's fitted over the bust, it's kind of drawn in at the waist, and then it skims over the hips as well. So let's compare the body measurements for this pattern. The finished garment measurements in this pattern for bust is actually 36.5. So you can see that with the example of this dress, which is much more fitted, there's only 4 inches of ease allowed in this pattern compared to the 15 inches that there were in the Marnie blouse. So in the case of this pattern, I might need to consider whether or not that's going to be enough ease for me. So let's say, for example, you've compared your body measurements to those on your pattern envelope. Your bust is matching the first size perfectly, but your waist and hips are coming out slightly larger. What do you do in that case? So for me, what I generally tend to do is go on the most fitted part of the garment. What I would then do is go to my finished garment measurements and just check how much larger at the waist and hips the garment is going to be once it's sewn. So how much ease is going to be in my finished garment. If the finished garment is coming up, say 4 to 6 inches larger than your actual body measurements, you might want to consider, well, do I need to grade or do any pattern alterations here? Or can I live with the fact that I'm going to have a little bit less ease in those areas than the pattern suggests? So this can be a little bit of sort of playing around, and it can be a bit of trial and error. And it generally does depend, of course, on the type of garment that you're making again. So if you're making something that's going to be quite tight fitting, you don't generally want to play around with ease too much because there's already going to be quite a small amount of ease in a tight fitting garment. If you're making, say, a fit and flare dress, that's gathered at the waist, you're generally going to have quite a lot of ease around the hips. So you won't necessarily need to bother too much that your hip measurement is slightly larger than the pattern suggests, because you're going to have a lot of fabric there that's just going to sort of poof out over your hips. It's not going to bother you. And again, in the same way, just compare those finished garment measurements to those given in the pattern, and decide whether or not you think that the amount of ease that you're going to be losing is going to be enough for you to be able to move comfortably. So I really hope that's been helpful. Just a few quick pointers there that I use myself when I come to consider what size I'm going to be sewing from a sewing pattern. I hope that's taken some of the sort of mystery and the scariness away. Like everything, it comes with practice and trial and error, and the more garments you sew, the more used to this kind of stuff you will become. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to watch the rest in my How to Start Sewing series. I'll link them all below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any future videos, and I will look forward to seeing you in another video soon. Take care, bye.